In 2002, one of the most famous men on the planet stood in front of a crowd in New York City and said something that shocked everyone who heard it. He called his record label, one of the most powerful music corporations in the world, racist. He said they were trying to sabotage him. He said they wanted him gone. And then, 7 years later, he was. This is the story of Michael Jackson versus Sony Music. And when you see how it ends, you'll wonder if any of it was really an accident. To understand what happened to Michael Jackson, you have to go back to 1991. That year, Michael signed what was then the most lucrative recording contract in music history, a deal with Sony Music worth a reported $65 million. It was unprecedented. Nobody had ever been paid that much. Michael was, by every measure, the biggest artist on the planet. But here's the thing about big deals. They come with big strings attached. Under this contract, Sony owned the rights to distribute Michael's music. They controlled how his albums were marketed, how many copies were pressed, how much promotional budget was spent. Michael could create the music, but Sony controlled how the world heard it. For a while, it worked. Dangerous sold over 32 million copies. The partnership seemed unstoppable. Then something changed. In 1985, Michael Jackson did something that would define the rest of his life and his death. He purchased ATV Music Publishing for $47.5 million, and inside that catalog, the rights to over 250 Beatles songs. Paul McCartney was furious. The public called it a betrayal. But Michael didn't care, because he understood something most artists never learn. Owning the masters means owning the money. Every time a Beatles song played in a film, a commercial, a TV show, Michael got paid. Every time Hey Jude or Let It Be was licensed, the check went to Michael Jackson. By the mid-1990s, that catalog was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and Sony wanted it. In 1995, Sony and Michael merged their publishing holdings into a joint venture called Sony/ATV Music Publishing. On paper, it looked like a partnership, but analysts at the time noted something interesting. If Michael ever defaulted on his loans, Sony had the legal pathway to acquire his share. The trap, some argue, had already been set. For years, Michael Jackson and Sony CEO Tommy Mottola had a professional relationship. Mottola had helped sign the historic 1991 deal. He was powerful, connected, and ruthless, by his own admission. But by the late 1990s, something had curdled between them. The flashpoint was Invincible, Michael's 2001 album, and the last he would ever release in his lifetime. Sony spent significantly less on promoting it than they had on previous albums. There were reports of limited marketing budgets, poor distribution support, and a general sense that the label wasn't pushing the record the way it should have been. Invincible still debuted at #1 in 13 countries, but it underperformed compared to Michael's earlier albums, and some close to him believe that was not an accident. In July 2002, Michael went public. He organized a protest outside Sony's New York offices. He stood before cameras and said, and I want you to hear exactly what he said, that Tommy Mottola was a racist and a devil who was deliberately trying to sabotage black artists at the label. He held up a sign. He gave interviews. He named names. For an artist of his stature to publicly attack his own label was almost unheard of. The industry was stunned. Sony denied everything. Mottola called the accusations ludicrous. The media largely sided with the corporation, and then things got very quiet, in a way that felt less like resolution and more like suppression. Here's where the story gets darker. Through the early 2000s, Michael Jackson was in serious financial trouble. Neverland Ranch cost millions to maintain. Legal fees from the 2003 and 2005 child molestation trial, which ended in his full acquittal, were enormous. He had taken out massive loans using his music catalog as collateral. And who held significant leverage over that catalog? Sony. By 2005, Michael owed Bank of America roughly $270 million, with his share of Sony/ATV as the primary collateral. If he defaulted, Sony was positioned to acquire full control of the catalog, including the Beatles songs, at a fraction of their true value. People close to Michael at the time said he was aware of this, that he knew the financial pressure wasn't just circumstance, it was engineered. Whether that's true is something we can't prove, but the timeline is difficult to ignore. By 2009, Michael had refinanced his debts and was preparing for what was billed as his greatest comeback, the This Is It concert series in London. 50 shows, a triumphant return. But those close to Michael say he was exhausted, anxious, and in some accounts, terrified. He was not sleeping. He was being administered powerful anesthetics by Dr. Conrad Murray, a doctor hired not by Michael's own medical team, but by AEG Live, the promoter behind the tour. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson was found unresponsive at his home. He was pronounced dead at UCLA Medical Center. Dr. Conrad Murray was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter, and within months of Michael's death, Sony moved to consolidate control of the Sony/ATV catalog. In 2016, Sony purchased Michael Jackson's estate's share of Sony/ATV for approximately $750 million, one of the most valuable music publishing deals in history. The catalog Michael had spent his life protecting was now entirely Sony's. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not telling you that Sony Music murdered Michael Jackson. Conrad Murray's actions were reckless and criminal, and he was held accountable. What I am saying is this. A man publicly accused his label of trying to destroy him. His final album was allegedly underpromoted. He was placed in a financial vice that tightened over years. His doctor was hired by the tour promoter, not by him. And when he died, the people who stood to gain the most from his catalog did exactly that. Was it a conspiracy? Was it negligence? Was it greed dressed up as business? You decide. But the next time you hear a Michael Jackson song, and you will, because they never stop playing them, ask yourself who's collecting that check. Because it isn't Michael. If this video made you think twice about the music industry, you're not alone. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Sony played a role in what happened to Michael Jackson?